Hello, history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 8, talking about the Jazz Age. And as we go along, make sure that you are getting your notes so that we are ready to go. And we're going to talk about politics. In 1920, there was a presidential election, and Warren G. Harding was nominated as a Republican candidate. When he won the election, he brought along many of his friends into the White House, such as Charles Evans Hughes as the Secretary of State. He also appointed Herbert Hoover, who during the First World War had been President Wilson's food czar, and finally Andrew Mellon to be his Secretary of the Treasury. Harding also gave some appointments to some of his political allies and friends that were known as the Ohio Gang. These were some of his old cronies who he used to play poker with, and unfortunately, he maybe was a little too close to these men because it led to corruption and numerous scandals during his time in the White House. So, one of our first scandals dealt with Harding's head of the Veterans Bureau, and the Veterans Bureau was set up after World War One, primarily to take care of our veterans who had served overseas during the First World War. And Charles Forbes was the man that you see pictured below, who was placed in charge of this. He had sold scarce medical supplies from veterans' hospitals, and he kept the money for himself at the cost of about $250 million, or a quarter of $1 billion. In this day and age, it probably would have been well over $1 billion. Uh, that is quite a sum of money, even today, but back in the 1920s, it was probably unthinkable at that point in time. Another scandal that occurred during Harding's administration involved what is called the Teapot Dome scandal. And Teapot Dome is actually a region in parts of kind of northeast, maybe a little more central Wyoming, where there is a huge reserve of oil. And Harding's Secretary of the Interior, a man named Albert B. Hall, secretly bribed was bribed for leasing oil reserves to some of his friends in places like Wyoming and California. The deal is this is oil that was set aside for the U.S. Navy, and we still use it to this day. But it's the idea that it wasn't supposed to be used for private interest. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you allow your friends to have a little too much say in what's going on. The Attorney General, a man named Harry Daltrey, also participated in a bribe involving a German owned American company and its valuable chemical patents. Rather than testifying under oath, Daltrey claimed that he had immunity based on his confidential dealings with the president. A lot of times today, we talk about things like executive privilege as a way to kind of allow the conversations that happen in the Oval Office to be immune from any kind of criminal prosecutions. Uh, for the most part, yeah, there probably was some wrongdoing here. Uh, Shortly thereafter, Warren G. Harding had traveled to San Francisco and he died of a heart attack. And as a result, his vice president, a man named Calvin Coolidge, who had been the governor of Massachusetts, becomes our new president. He's nicknamed Silent Cal because he's known for not saying a lot, but he was a guy that believed in kind of the laissez faire principle of business and capitalism. And so he believed that the prosperity of our country depended upon its business leaders and their ability to innovate. Really, that's kind of an idea that is still held by Republicans even in this day and age. Policies of prosperity. Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon, who we mentioned earlier, he had three goals under the Harding administration and then eventually under Coolidge. And these are goals that even today the modern Republican Party still embrace. One is to reduce government debt. The other is to balance our budget, which is very difficult to do, especially now in the modern day and age. Some state governments, including Nebraska, have to balance their budgets because it's within their constitutions. And finally, to reduce taxes, which I believe that most Republicans, when they're campaigning uh, either for president or governor or even for uh, US Congress, that's one of the promises that they like to keep. So, Secretary Mellon convinced Congress to create the General Accounting Office, which is still with us today, but it provides a little bit of oversight in the executive branch for the government to kind of go back and look at how Congress and the president is spending money in order to track government spending. A lot of times they can actually find out what the real cost is for a program that's being proposed on Capitol Hill or what the president might be calling for as far as some kind of governmental incentive. Mellon's idea that lower tax rates grow the economy resulted in the government collecting more taxes, is today known as supply side economics. All right, Secretary Conference was Herbert Hoover. Conference is a fancy name for business, but he encouraged economic growth through the idea of cooperative individualism, which encouraged businesses to form trade associations. He believed that it would reduce cost and promote economic efficiency. The Dawes Plan was negotiated by Charles G. Dawes. It was an agreement with France, Great Britain, and Germany and the United States to allow U.S. banks to make loans to Germany to help make its reparation payments in exchange for British and French um, leaders to accept less in reparations and to pay back more of their war debts to the United States. It's really the Dawes Act that really takes a lot of the burden off of Germany as far as having to pay reparations. This doesn't go into effect till about 1924, but as a result, Germany's economy kind of stabilizes as a result of this. This was considered to be a major achievement of the Coolidge administration. Trade and arms control. By the end of World War One, the dominant economic power of the world was the United States. And our goal was to promote peace by using our economic power and our arms control agreements. And let me tell you, we had many of these that were going to be born out of this era of time. Agreements limiting the number of people that could be in any of the armed forces, limiting the type of materials that we were going to use, such as aircraft, naval ships, including battleships, aircraft carriers, even submarines. Most Americans had become tired of European politics and really embraced this idea of isolationism. The political cartoon that you see below, where there's kind of a wall around the continental United States, really kind of sums it up. It's this idea that we're going to mind our own business and we're not going to get entangled in other people's situations. So, 1921, representatives of eight major countries came to the Washington Conference to discuss disarmament. Representatives proposed a 10-year halt on construction of new warships by the United States, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. And this became known as the Five Power Naval Limitation Treaty. Now, you might notice that Germany is not on here, and as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, they were kind of forced to liquidate their navy and their armed forces in general. But the idea is to kind of keep people from wanting to go to war. By 1928, the United States Secretary of State Frank Kellogg and French Foreign Minister Astrid Brand proposed the Kellogg-Brand Pact, and this is going to call for all signing nations to abandon war and settle disputes peacefully. So, in other words, this pact outlawed warfare. And unfortunately, it's not going to last very long. As we move into the 1930s, we're going to see that there's going to be some aggression in Asia by the Japanese. We're also going to see the rise of the Third Reich. and this desire to kind of expand Germany's boundaries before 1939. You're also going to see a civil war happening in Spain and some I guess you could say some aggressive movements by Italy in Africa. So, needless to say, this was going to be a rough haul. Just looking at the maps here, you have kind of the electoral college maps for the elections of 1924 and 1928. Both elections were won by Republican candidates, and if you take a look, it seems like the Republican Party was doing quite well for itself in both terms. Matter of fact, even by 1928, the Republican influence grew, and kind of pushing the Democrats really to be a party of just the Deep South. So, thank you very much